My name is Rob Rothschild. I'm the marketing director here at the Center for Applications of Psychological Type, and we are the publishers of the Murphy-Meiskeier Type Indicator for Children. And this is under the umbrella of our new People Stripes brand, and that's where the website is, where everything is housed that pertains to the MMTIC. And we are so pleased to today have with us the author of the assessment and the supreme leader of all things having to do with psychological type and kids. Dr. Elizabeth Murphy is here. And today we're going to talk about the Z model for decision making, helping your children and the students you work with go through that process. And of course, it's something we do as adults too. So Elizabeth, welcome. Take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Just for a sense, if you can raise your hand on the computer, how many of you have used the People Stripe site and read some of the articles that are there?
I've got 3 answers so far. Yes, 3 yeses.
Okay. They get updated, fairly frequently. Good. We're talking about the Z model today, but there's an article on that site about it that you can use and refer to if you needed to. Well, we are working with some 3rd graders, so 8-year-old and 9-year-old students at an elementary school in North Carolina. And we've introduced the children to type, and they were able to use the MTIC to discover their type. And now we're using the tools. One of those tools that we're using with this group is the Z model. And the children get it. They totally get it. We're using it instructionally as well as personally. It's funny, so many times people will think, oh, that's too young. They can't understand all of this. But we had a group of about, I guess there might have been 7 students who sat around the table and were interviewed. And they just said things like, it feels so good to know me. That one little girl was so cute. She goes, in 2nd grade, I just didn't know me. But now in 3rd grade, I understand me so much better. And another girl said, I used to only have friends who were like me. But now that I know about these differences, my world is so much bigger. I have a chance to meet so many other more people and recognize how we all could have been friends, and you didn't have to be like me to be my friend. When we taught them the Z model, and the Z is very simple if you haven't remembered what it was, but it focuses on the core part of the personality that develops. It focuses on the functions, and the functions are sensing or intuition, thinking or feeling. So just a gentle reminder in case it was a while ago for you. With sensing, we know that the students appreciate information, sequence, practicality, usefulness. With intuition, we know that students value innovation, looking at things from a different perspective, that unique way of approaching things, and their interest falls in the design phase, whereas the sensor falls more into the application, the user phase. With thinking, we know that the student is looking at things logically, objectively, that they are driven for finding the best answer that will work at that time. They tend to think beyond the individual and think more for a group or a country or a world. So it's not a personal association, it's much more of a conceptual association. We also know that the thinking student can be very direct in their language when they're explaining something. And then the feeling, the F, is about what is important. How important is this? How will this impact others? How will this help this one person in front of me? So when we're looking at things like that, we're asking the students to say, what do we know? What do we still need to know? Which would be sensing. What else could we discover? Which would be intuition. how is this going to work? Is it going to be efficient? Do we have the resources we need? The critical analysis, T. And is it worth our time? Is it worth it to say this? Why would we want to bother doing this? And how will it impact the people? So they get it. And a couple of the children, when they were talking about it, they said, the Z model makes me feel so much more comfortable with my choices because I know I have thought through each of the areas. One of their classroom lessons was Peter Pan. They were reading Peter Pan. And so the teacher asked them to make a decision about how Hook and Pan might resolve their differences, what was possible. They took a sheet, just divided into the 4 of the S, the N, the T, and the F, and sat down with classmates in groups that were 3 or 4, or they were allowed to work individually, which again is using our type concepts. And they could begin anywhere they wanted. So a lot of the sensing children began in the sensing box, the quadrant. And I remember going past one little girl and time was going by and I said, you seem to have a lot of information in that sensing side. Is that enough or are you comfortable to move on? And she looked at me and said, no, there's more that we need to write here. So that's not uncommon for children and adults to stay in their favorite spot. So he said, okay, there's no time limit on it, so you can stay there as long as you want. If there was a time limit, it might be that is your favorite. And if you have enough, you've only got 10 minutes left to do the other 3, and you could help pace them around. But I loved one little girl, and it was not a political statement. She was literally thinking straightforward, but she said one solution that she came after she thought about the sensing part was perhaps they could just build a wall and split the island. And Pan and the boys could be on one side and Hook could have the other side. So when that group of about 7 to 10 kids, I don't remember exactly how many were there, were talking, and someone said, well, how does this work for you? And what did you think about decisions that your friends were making with Peter Pan? The one person said, well, I think they gave us the wall decision, but they only gave that to us after looking at the sensing side. I think if they had done the intuition, thinking, and feeling side, they might have realized it's hard to be a friend between the walls, and they might have thought of something else. But they were still in the process of it, so they weren't done yet. The beauty of it from the teacher's perspective is they say the kids are doing better thinking, better analysis, because they're actually focusing on all 4 pieces. And they're recognizing that this is my favorite side, but it's not your favorite side, but yours is good for you. And boy, I'm glad to hear your side. One teacher even said that she had a little boy who was gifted. I mean, he was just a prodigy in math. So he was so smart in math that nobody else could equal him. And he felt superior to the other students. But when they looked at it by the type functions of S, N, T, and F, all of a sudden he realized there's some people in this room that have a brilliance that I don't have in a different area, and became more respectful of the different learners. So this is incidental stuff, but it's real life. It's actually what happens. So to help the kids out, we actually made cards for them. One side of the card is me, Z. I'm solving the problem for me. What kind of questions do I need to ask myself? So like if they had to do a science project, we said in sensing, what kinds of science projects have won in the past? What kind of science projects have been done in the past? What kind of science projects have been done within the 6 weeks that we have instead of taking longer? And they would have looked at examples of previous science projects that were recognized as exceptional as a way of framing their information. Intuitive. You always have to have at least 2 ways to do something, because if the first day doesn't work, you've got that backup way ready to go immediately. And so we ask them, things like, well, is there a new area of interest that maybe wasn't around before? Is there something you are excited about that you don't know much about, but you'd like to investigate it? Is there a unique approach to making that volcano with, what is it, baking soda, so that it explodes, so that it gives us a different perspective? With the thinking, do I have everything I need? Do I have the time? Do I have the resources? Do I have the skills? Can I find the help if I need help? Most T kids want to work independently until they get stuck. And then they want help with the piece they're stuck on, and that's all. They don't want help with everything. They just want to have that help with that one part, and then they want to go forward. And then feeling, is this a worthwhile project? Could this project make a significant difference? Is it worth it? Would my family be proud of this? Would my teacher be proud of this? Because remember, the feeling person looks through the eyes of others first, especially at that young age. And then they would say, and I'm proud of it. But their pride comes from knowing that those other important people in their life would be proud of it and manage it. So that's if they're solving the problem for themselves. But we realized if they're working on a team and it's a team problem, then they're going to need to have the questions slightly different. So on the other side of the card, when you flip it over, we see questions that you would ask if you were doing team problem solving. The nice part about the team card is it also allows us to assign areas. So that sensing, what do we already know? Is there more we need to know or research? If I've got a whole team of adult intuitives and I say, who would like to pick that one up and do more research? I may never get anyone to volunteer for that part. But because the groups in schools are more generic, we're more likely to have some of each of the types. And remember, sensors are about 70% of the overall typing in adults. So we would likely find some sensing, some intuitive, some thinking, and some feeling, because they haven't been sorted through their career into more discrete choices. So then the team might say, is there anybody who would like to take the lead on that? Maybe nobody raises their hand, or maybe they look at all their options first, because certainly some would say, well, what else are there? So that intuitive part would be, what other options could we try? Is there a new way of solving this? What can we do instead? What could Peter Pan do that would be very unique, that had never been tried before in working between the pirates and the lost boys? When they do the thinking, it's like, well, is our answer going to solve the problem? Because usually you use a decision-making model to solve the problem. The science example was, what will I do for my science project? The team example might be, what will we do for our group project? So it could be whatever, but you want to make sure that the analysis that you're going to do will solve the problem. It just won't generate 4 areas of discussion. The feeling part is where we look now, like, did everyone have a chance for input? And if you remember, one of the strategies that we've talked about in the past is that it's called polling, Polling. And so instead of saying, everybody get a chance to say something, you would say, Greg, any thoughts, any comments, anything else you'd like to ask or say? Karen, how about you? Susan, any other thoughts, any other comments, anything else, any questions, any hesitations? Eric, but you ask each person individually. Now, most teams with young children are 5 or fewer. So you're able to do that quite nicely and quite quickly. But it's a whole lot more effective when you ask each person than when you just say, everybody good? Everybody okay? Anyone else have any thoughts? Because that says to them, they get a chance to say, well, I'm not sure yet. I'd like to have a little more thinking time if I could. But the fact that everybody should have some input would be a piece from the feeling perspective. And if they make a decision, like if they make a decision to close this section of the field, how is it going to impact others? Well, it's always muddy over there. So if we just close that field, then nobody will have muddy shoes and that'll keep the floors clean. And that was our problem. How do we help the janitor keep the floors cleaner? But then somebody else might say, but that's the only place you can play soccer. And third graders love to have the soccer opportunity when they can. So then they say, oh, okay, then that would stop a lot of kids from getting that chance to play soccer. So now let's go back to that intuition and think, what else could we do? That was one potential solution. But when we look at the feeling side, we realize how that could seriously impact their playtime. And let's consider if there's something else going on. So Z is not complicated. And the 8-year-olds are fine with it. They're like, oh, Z. And the Z is only there because the 4 letters created a Z. Originally, there was some belief that you followed the Z in order, from sensing to intuition to thinking to feeling. I totally disagree with that, and I think many others do also. So when I say use the Z, I say you can do any one of the 4 functions, sensing, intuition, thinking, or feeling, first, second, third, or fourth, whichever order you want. You just don't reach your conclusion, your decision, until you have explored all 4 of these areas. It makes for incredible discussions. Like I said, even about Peter Pan. But parents can do that. Instead of, one of the kids said, my mom would love this one because instead of my brother and I arguing and she solving it for us, she could just tell my brother and I, go do the Z and see what you guys can figure out. And I think we'd be able to figure out something. So I think my mom's going to love this so she doesn't have to help my brother and I when we're fussing at each other. She didn't use the word fussing, but I don't remember which word she used. But that was her intended message. So, anyone out there, have you used the Z with children or with parents and what they need to do when they're working with their children? Yeah, it doesn't have to be about the Z.
That's true.
It's just that that's been such a powerful little piece, and a piece that seems so easy for parents and children to understand, that if we lose it from our repertoire of tools when we're working with type, it's just kind of nice to have it back in our front pocket.
I had a question, Elizabeth. Is there a chance that one could rely too heavily on one of the functions while doing the Z model and just get sidetracked and maybe not complete the full Z? I can imagine that depending on the decision, one might go, that's it, I'm done. Is there anything to think about there?
Rob, what you're hinting at is that developmentally, we're going to favor 1.
Yeah.
Maybe 2. And the 3rd and the 4th are going to be like, what? Who thinks that way? But the good news is, if it is a team issue, you'll see how people with those other preferences get excited about that part, which for you may not be your first choice, your natural choice. So the Z does exactly the opposite. The tendency from people before the Z, or the children before the Z, was to get locked into their favorite side and to keep everybody geared in the discussion on their favorite side so that they didn't consider the full range of options. But now the kids are saying, oh, it's so much better when we look at all 4. It's funny. One little child said, I used to have a knot in my stomach about my choices because I was never really sure if they were the good ones or not. But when I do the Z, I don't have that not. Almost like I did my work. I thought about it from multiple perspectives. So therefore, I can be at peace with the decision I'm making. If a person gets locked and only gets focused on the one, like that one little girl that was overextending her time on sensing, it's a pacing. So then it might be, I need you to spend 2 minutes on each of the others, and then you can go back to sensing if you'd like. But you need to taste some intuitive questions, some thinking questions, and some feeling questions before you develop any more time, only because we have a limited amount of clock time to work on this project. If we did not, if you could take it for home and finish it for homework, I would allow you to stay where your favorite place is as long as you wanted. But the reality is, in some classrooms and some tasks, there will be a time limit, and we just let the kids know that in advance so they can help pace it. But oh, sure. And it's not just kids who do that. If you attend a lot of adult meetings, will be somebody going, well, I don't know, what have we done before? What's worked in the past? And somebody else saying, we don't need to be bound by the past. We've got the whole future ahead of us. We can look at any option. So let's not be tied down to what worked in the past. Those are just examples. Let's think of what else we could do. And somebody else saying, well, we don't have the moon. We don't have the resources. So let's be reasonable and make sure that what we're investing in solve the problem for the longest period of time that it can. And then it'd be like, but also we don't want to exhaust our staff. So if we're suggesting that everybody do all kinds of different things that are going to just exhaust them, that's not going to work either. So in business meetings, I will hear the people going to their favorite function as a driving force to say, let's make sure this discussion gets on the table too. With a Z model, it always gets on the table. So if I had all intuitives on a team, and I have had all intuitive adults, they don't typically ask the sensing question. And if they're thinking, they don't typically ask the feeling question. But the Z forces you to pay attention to that perspective. And so the kids are getting the idea clearly that there are 4 ways of looking at this. Businesses have said things to me like, if you'll teach them to think and be respectful of others, I can teach them their job. So the specifics of their job that these 3rd graders may be doing in 10 years, 12 years, may be so different from what we ask people to do now. But respect for differences and ability to process thought in multiple ways won't change. And so therefore, those will be lifelong tools that they can have. The other wonderful benefit is when you use a function, you cause it to develop. Remember the analogy for blowing up the balloon? Every time you blow up the balloon, that the beginning time will be hard, but the 50th time will be quite easy. So every time they use a choice, look at it from different perspectives by pulling up those 4 functions, they're actually causing the development of each of those functions, which then will make it easier for them to access them when they need it. But you can get to 45, and if you've never accessed your final function, your 4th function, it will be as hard as if you were 8 years old and pulling it up.
I'm in trouble.
In terms of decisions,
hey, Elizabeth, Karen wants to offer something. Can I interrupt?
Absolutely.
Karen, can you hear us?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I just love the fact that this has actually come up not only personally but professionally. Talking to some high schoolers about making career choices and resolving conflict in their own family around the table, realizing that even the adults have blind spots.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes by the power of their position, their blind spot has a greater force.
Amplified, yes.
Yes, but the Z model takes that away too.
Absolutely. It's a very great equalizer and very useful tool.
It is an equalizer. That's a good word for it.
Thanks, Karen. Does anyone else want to take advantage of this actual FaceTime with the author of the instrument? You can ask anything you like. Oh, I see. Here we go. David Pierpont is asking a question. Okay, I'm going to read what David said. I do love the Z model for touching all the functions, but as someone with a preference for intuiting, it's difficult to force that function into a step in a process. Many of my best ideas for problem solving only come to light of their own volition when they are ready. Interesting. How best to accommodate similar experiences with students so they don't doubt the validity and value of the intuiting function? Oh, thanks, David. You did tell me you had no mic, so I read it. Thanks.
So that's a great question, but it's almost as if it's two different issues, because one is in the creative phase. The one is saying, where can I dedicate my energies best? And the other is solving a problem. So the decision-making model is a Z model is a decision-making model. It's what do I need to do in this moment, in this instance? But when I'm creating, I'm going to be looking for whichever thing gives me my most inspiration. And Sensing Children, when they're doing writing activities, have said they don't get an idea first. They start thinking of all the things they want to say, all of the information they want to put down. And then if they use like the Ellis organizer, they can block that into those three main boxes, and then look at what they put inside the box and say, what is all that information about? Oh, okay, it's about eggs. Okay, and what is the next one about? How we cook with eggs. And what is the third one about? Where do eggs come from? Okay, so you've got eggs here, information, cooking, whatever. What would be a topic area? The food group of eggs. Now, what's a title for that? But they work from the information to the idea. When you talk about, David, when you're talking about intuition, I don't know how it works for you, but for most intuitives, it's about looking for that inspiration, that connection, that nuance that then creates the meat, the pieces that go with it. Their first insight will be the aha, the great idea. And if you're an extroverted intuitive and you're stuck for an idea, you tend to look around your world for books, pictures, objects, anything to create the inspiration. If you're an introverted intuitive, you tend to shut your eyes, block out all new input, and go inside to that reservoir of the million pieces of information and things you've already learned in your life and see how those hook together to come up with something. So some intuitives will say, oh, I get the title for the article first, and then I write. But once I've got the title, then I know what I'm doing. Everything else will kind of fall into place. So the Z model is not to give equality to everything. It's to make sure that no one area is neglected when you have to make a decision. But when you're in the creative phase, absolutely, we tend to go toward our favorite side as our way of processing the creation. So good comment, good call.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you. Here's a question from Greg. Greg, I'm going to unmute your mic. You should be able to talk and we should hear you. There, Greg?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Elizabeth, thanks for taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure.
It's very informative. The Z model, I can see how it could be very useful and helpful in working with parents trying to communicate with them when the kids are not being very cooperative, so not getting their shoes on, something so basic as that. And I know that creates a lot of frustration between families, the parent and the child. I was hoping you can maybe give an example how any parent or myself, our teachers, can use the Z model to resolve the most basic conflicts over things?
Well, that's a great question. And I like your example of finding your shoes, because actually that does cross all age groups. There's been more than one high school student that's gone around looking for their cleats or looking for their tennis shoes for whatever sport they're playing that they need them. It's almost like saying, okay, the problem is you can't find your shoes. So I always start with, what's the problem? Let's see, where do we keep them? Usually, where do you remember seeing them if you do? Anything at all you know about where the shoes have been in the past? Okay, what new place could they be hiding? What new places have you explored? If we can't find the shoes you need, then what other options do we have? And it's important to have your shoes so that you don't get hurt, and because where we're going requires you to have shoes. We're going to a restaurant that has requirement that has shoes. So we do need to solve this problem. Which one do you want to look at first? New options, where they might be, whatever. But it takes the emotion out of it. When the kids are caught up in the emotion of frustration, they have no tool coming to mind. When the parent is caught in the frustration and emotion, they have no tool coming to mind. So going toward the Z takes it away from the person and their irritation in the moment, and lets it just be a problem to be solved. On People Stripes, if you do happen to go there, I wrote an article about how we should approach the timeout chair differently. Because right now we send kids to timeout to calm down, which was definitely better than giving them a swat. But then they come out of timeout and we go, are you sorry? And they'll nod their head. You're going to do it again? They'll nod their head. All right, now you can go play. But then if you talk to the kids, they have no idea what they did that was wrong. They have no idea what they will do in place of it. So instead of calling it a timeout chair, I just say it's our problem-solving chair. And when you're ready, we'll solve the problem. So let's say they got mad and threw something, a toy, and it hit the wall. Okay. So you threw a toy when you got mad. That's the problem. Let's see what we need to do to solve it. What happened with the toy? What was the problem? It wouldn't work. Okay. It kept falling down. Okay. Anything else? What did you try when it did that? Okay. Was there anything else that could be tried that maybe you didn't think of at the time and you might want to think of if it ever happened again? What else? How else might you have solved that? Okay. I know your love for independence means you like to handle things on your own. But if you did want someone to help you, what would have been a way that you could have gotten that help? What could you have said or done that maybe could get you help when you need it, if you want it? But we know that throwing the toy when you're upset is not the solution. And so we need a different solution in case a toy acts up like that again for you. It takes more time, but in the end, you're teaching the child how to think. You're teaching the child it's not just remove, punishment, consequence, tolerate, and then get out. It's about, identify what caused this outburst so I can manage this outburst the next time. You know, that's our theme on type is know myself so I can manage myself better. Does that help at all?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. Now Eric has a question. Let's see. Eric, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you too. Go ahead.
I think we talked about the Z model majorly focused on the function, but if the case is not adult, so they are developing the functions in the age, right? Become older. So my question is, So what's the purpose or intention we use the Z model for kids? Is it just like the bring awareness of the development? So how what's the intention of purpose in the behind?
Sure, great question. I think some people have heard it develops as you age, thinking that it's almost like there's an internal time clock within you, and that your dominant will develop, and then when this certain time hits in your developmental life, then the auxiliary, and then the third, and then the fourth. But actually, the function develops from using it. So therefore, when we have even 8-year-olds using all 4 functions, they are causing that function to develop, to emerge, to come to conscious awareness. Because development isn't about absence or presence. It's about whether the energy of that function is unconsciously driving you, or whether the energy of that function is in your conscious control. So if you think of all 4 functions, the sensing, the intuition, the thinking, and the feeling, as starting out in the unconscious. And because I'm from Texas and we have tornadoes, I like to use the comparison to 4 tornadoes, where the next biggest, the third, and then the smallest is the inferior or 4th function. But that tornado, all 4 tornadoes are constantly in motion, which means the energy of all of the functions is alive in us, whether we have consciousness about them or not. When you use the function, you cause that energy of the tornado to come to the surface, to come to consciousness. Now you can manage it. So if all you pull up is your dominant, you're still being impacted unconsciously by your 2nd, 3rd, and 4th functions. When we bring them up and bring them to consciousness, when they go back down into the unconscious when we're not using them, it's still like that balloon. Oh, but I used that once before. So the first time I did my taxes and had to have all of the details, I'm an intuitive. Oh my word. I thought that was the most horrible task in life. And why would you have to, who would have all, over the years, I now put the pieces of information I'm going to need in the folder. It's labeled tax information. So at tax time, I could pull it out and start working right away. My experience taught me that. Had I had a CPA in my life, they might have taught me those strategies earlier. If I repeat and imitate a behavior, if I just do what somebody else told me to do, I'm not developing my thinking about it. I'm not developing my preference. But if I sat and considered, all right, I'm going to have about 500 pieces of information. What's the best way to organize them? Now I'm doing the thinking. So the advantage to exposing children to the characteristics is to increase their conscious awareness so they can choose to use that if they need it. And by doing the Z, we're helping them learn the value of balance, that all the functions need balance. You need both your sensing side and your intuitive side to be effective. You need to analyze it in a thinking way as well as in a feeling way, the 2 subjective ways of looking at the data. So there is a reason. It's not that you're pushing the children to adulthood too soon. And it is because the functions develop from use. Many of our adults have developed their functions incidentally. They didn't even know they were doing it. But by some of the tasks that they did as a child, it forced them to look at things innovatively or sequentially and from a foundation of information. They would have had a favorite. So will the children who know Z. But now they understand, oh, but now I'm not in my favorite part of me. I'm in my stretch part of me. So that's okay that this takes harder for me. I'm not as good at that. So I'm stretching and working harder. One of the kids in the study emailed their teacher and said, I'm going to do your homework assignment, but I just want you to appreciate it's the stretch side for me. So I'm going to be working quite hard to get it done. Well, some kids think the harder I work, the better the grade should be, when the grade is based on the output, not how hard you worked. And now they know everybody has a part of them where they're going to have to work harder, and everybody has a part of them that's going to be their strength. It's going to be a little bit easier for them because they've developed it more. So very good question, clarifying that this is not an age thing, this is a use thing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. That was a great set of examples there. Does anyone else have a question? Here we go. Karen, go ahead.
Oh, Elizabeth, I was just wondering if you're under stress or in that pressure of the moment when people are throwing shoes as opposed to trying to find them or think about it. Is it easier or harder to use the UZ model?
So when it's intense like that,
yes,
I use first the whatever it is that calms you. And that if we calm first, then we can analyze. It's not when everybody's so wild and emotional that we want to use the Z. So like for an F child, most F kids, although they'll resist initially, calm with a hug. The world has just been more than they can tolerate, and they just need a hug. And so when I'm hugging them, I'm going to say, I'm going to build up your energy, honey. It looks like your battery is empty. And, we have to plug our phones in to get more juice in them. Well, I'm going to hug you, not plug you. I'm going to hug you to give you some more juice. And we'll solve that other problem. We'll take care of it. But right now, let's just build up your battery so you have all the energy you need to do your best thinking. Okay? It's amazing when you get the person calm, you have a whole different condition. The problem when some families is, and I had those, my kids are adults now, but I can remember when I had no energy left and they had no energy left. And we just should not have been in the same room because all we did was increase the other person's total sense of frustration. But I will tell you, like I saw something, I think it was on Facebook, just delightful. And I think it said it was a teacher in Australia, but I think it was like a first grade classroom. And she had on the panel of right beside the light switch by the door frame, she had a picture of a heart, a picture of a shaking hands, a picture of a fist bump, and I think a picture of a wave. And every morning, she said, when the kids come into school, they just choose which one they want as their greeting. So if they'd like a hug, they get a hug. If they'd like a fist bump, they get a fist bump. If they'd like a wave, they get a wave or a shaking of the hand. But nobody is missed in terms of welcoming them, greeting them. So that definitely is an F approach to making sure everybody feels welcome coming into my class. But the beautiful part is every child gets to make a decision every day. And so if the teacher is a hugging teacher and she's like, oh, come on, let me just give you a little hug. Let me just do. No, they don't have to have that if that's not welcoming for them. But they just look at the wall, point to the one they want, and that's the greeting they get. And the smiles on each of the kids' face was amazing just because, yeah, I'm in charge of my world. That's what type is about. It gives me more control with decisions. And the more we start to respect that for even little things, the better it will be. So let's say you have a major event happen. Somebody's bleeding. You don't use the Z model. You stop the bleeding. And so you go, okay. But the problem didn't go away. So when you're ready to solve the problem that caused the bleeding, that's when you do the Z. And it could be 24 hours later if it needs to be. It could be a week later if it needs to be. It just never goes away until it's resolved. And then that's a nice side piece to teach the kids that avoiding problems doesn't work because they're gonna come back. We're gonna take care of it. But right now, what's most important is healthcare, not learning, not cognition.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We need to remember that. Stop the bleeding. I like that. Let's not forget.
gotta start the game.
Does anyone else? Here's Michael's asking a question.
I was just wondering what would be some ways you could calm a T kid?
T kids usually get emotional in their moment of incompetence. They are so frustrated with life when they don't feel in control of life. So if they can't make that shoelace get tied, if they can't kick that soccer ball, if they can't get the train to go on the track right, it's their incompetence that is most at question. So I would use active listening with the T and say, right now, your skills aren't showing at their best because your feelings are coming into play too. So let's take some deep breaths and see what skill we need to get in order to do this well. But sometimes they are frustrated with adults in their world. I know I've told this story before, so if you have heard this story, I apologize, but it's a clear example of kind of what you're talking about. The child was about 7 or 8. It was a young age, and they were playing community basketball, so no leagues, no competitions. You're just friendly. Every week you play a game against someone. This child was a T preference, so fairness. And at that age, adults always should be right. They don't really appreciate an adult who makes a mistake. So the ref made a call, and it was a bad call. And so because of that call, the other team got to make a basket. And this kid yells out, "The ref's wrong." And nobody listened. They said, "Shh, just play." "No, the ref's wrong." So the coach pulls him off and puts somebody else in. And he's sitting on the sidelines and his tears are coming down. And he's saying, "The ref is wrong." All of the adults around this child go to F comforting. "It's okay, hon. It's just a game. It's all right, dear. People do that. It's okay. Honestly, everything you do, you're doing a great job out there." The mom, who noticed all of this, comes down out of the stands, goes over and looks at him and said, "The ref was wrong. Do you want to play the game or not?" "Yes." "But the ref was wrong." "Yes, the ref was wrong. It happens." Okay. He just wanted people to acknowledge that he was right, the ref was wrong, and that shouldn't have happened, but it did. So now, what do you want to do? Play the game or not? And so for the child, just being heard made a big difference. Didn't need the comforting. The comforting meant nothing, actually caused probably more tears to come because it's okay, honey, it'll be okay. It's like, you're not listening. I'm already fine. It's the ref that is wrong. That's all he needed to acknowledge was, yes, the ref was wrong. So for many T kids, I sometimes acknowledge the injustice of the situation. It's not fair that you have to do 20 problems when you already know how to do them. But the rule is we live with the law until we change the law. We live with the home rule until we change the home rule. So if you think the rule is unfair, you bring it up at family meeting, you bring it up in front of the school council. You do what you need to do to change the rule. But until the rule is changed, even if it's an unfair rule, we follow it. So right now, you have to do 20 examples. But I will tell you the process you need to use in order to change that rule for the future. All they want is that empowerment, but they also want acknowledgement that what's being asked of them is not reasonable.
Right.
At least that's how I have found working with T's.
That's a very good example.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That's good. We're going to have one more question from Greg since we're almost to the end. Greg, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, great. For the Z model, I was wondering whether if more from the type dynamics approach, does that change the way we utilize a Z? For example, if a child is extroverted sensing, do we use the same process with introverted sensing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is a function approach that doesn't include the attitudes. So it's how they're going to use that function. So an extroverted sensor is going to be gathering that data interactively and talking to others about it. And the introverted sensor is going to want to go look in the book and pull up what they can and do it independently. But they're both still saying the most important thing is to get the information we need. So what we did not do on the Z model for the 8-year-olds was include the attitude. Now, they learned about their E and I preference, but we did not teach them that each of the functions is extroverted or introverted. I would easily do that at high school.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Well, Rob, we had a great group here. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. They showed some real thought. I appreciate that. And we are always open to questions if you need to send them to us or whatever, but we want to help you be able to use Type with Kids well. So whatever we need to do to help you with that process, we would like to.
Yes, you can always email me. My address is easy. It's rob@capt.org, capt.org, and I'll pass on anything to Elizabeth. And thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I learned a lot, as I always do, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you. And if you haven't had a chance to go to People Stripes, don't make the mistake I did. The first couple of times I could never get it to come up. And I called Rob and said, I can't make it work because I was writing peoplestripes.com and it's peoplestripes.org.
Yep.
When I typed it in right, it came up easily. So.
Yeah, you should see on your screen right now. Elizabeth just put a great piece up about what Game of Thrones and Type might have in common. Turns out quite a lot.
I'm enjoying Game of Thrones, so had to pull it in there. But thank you all for spending your hour with us this evening. And really, I'm impressed with the quality of the questions. They were very good. So thank you for participating. And enjoy yes. Type, enjoy kids, enjoy the Z.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending. Look for us on People Stripes and have a wonderful evening.